style. It's so great to get to know this congregation style because each of these congregations, fellowships, have their own culture. And so that is a major part of learning. So again, my name is the Reverend Nic Cable, and I'm so grateful to be here with you all today. My hope is to share a little bit about some work that I'm doing in my own ministry and in the congregation down in Columbus, Indiana, and then also about some research I've been doing in my pursuit of a doctor of ministry, and then really open into some conversation with all of you. I think that the fact that you took out of your time to not stay on Zoom, and I'm grateful those who stayed on Zoom because it makes it so much more accessible, but to come here in person, I really want to make sure we do as much interaction and engagement as possible. So as Lori said, or as Lori may have alluded to, Lori and Jason used to live in Columbus, Indiana, and they were some of the first people I met when I moved there 9 years ago with my wife, before we had children. And we felt really drawn to that area because there was something really special that was going on in southern Indiana, and perhaps you feel that up here in the Upper Peninsula. The thing that was really special happening in southern Indiana is that the congregation was in pretty much the entirety of its 50-year history at that time, engaging in interfaith community building. And what I mean by that is that they, from their outset, shared religious spaces, their congregational space, with other faith communities. So for example, they were founded in 1967, and 2 years later, the Jewish community moved into the space that they were inhabiting, and ever since 1969, have been cohabitating together. And then in the mid-90s, a Hindu community, which was only about 25 families at that time, were looking for space, and they found open doors to the Unitarian community, and they came in as well. So now you have these Unitarian Universalists, for a long time a fellowship until 1988, so they were very much like a lay-led, lay-strong congregation. They didn't need no stinking ministers. And then a Jewish congregation came in, and a Hindu society came in. And then in the mid-2010s, before I got there, about 4 years before I got there, a Buddhist Sangha was looking for a community, and they said, hey, could we meet in your community as well? And there was some overlap. There was a few people who were connected, so it wasn't completely out of the blue. But now we had this UU, Jewish, Hindu, and Buddhist groups, and if we can make it any more diverse, later a coven asks if they can meet with us in the early 2020s. So about 4 years ago, Tree of Knowledge Community Coven asked if they could use space. Now, where are we? So we're in southern Indiana. This is the hometown of Mike Pence. All right, there's lots of Pences all around. This is the hometown of Cummins Engine Company, a large Fortune 150 company. So there's a lot of international folks who move in, perhaps kind of like the mix of the UP, which has a lot of people who are lifelong folks, and then people who move here, maybe for school or maybe to retire. So you have a real mixture of folks. But now, in 2002, they built a building out on 8 acres of land just west of the city. So now, when I arrive in 2017, they have this big question mark. How do we, in my opinion, and their understanding, get out of the nested dolls version of pluralism or diversity, where you're all kind of too close to see your differences, and start separating to really build a campus of interfaith diversity? And so that's a big reason that I came. A little background on my story. So I came into ministry through being raised Unitarian Universalist in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was raised in youth and young adult leadership ministry, a lot like Donald, I believe. Very loved into the youth and young adult leaders that we became. And I wanted to become a minister when I was about 15 years old. So when I went to undergrad in Chicago at DePaul University, I studied religion, of course, ethics and social justice focus, but I also studied peace, justice, and conflict resolution studies because somewhere in the back of my mind, I felt like understanding things around peace and conflict might be useful as a minister or living in this diverse society. And boy, does that second major come much more handy than knowing something about religion, because really all religion is a big old mixture of navigating peace, conflict, and the mediation that is required therein. So while at DePaul, I got really involved in interfaith leadership development. And so I became understanding religious leadership as inseparable from interfaith leadership or pluralism, that there is no religion in a vacuum. There's no, like the M. Night Shyamalan, that movie, The Village, there's no this extra society. I mean, there are some, but for the most part, we live in these diverse societies where we have to make sense of our identity in relationship to difference, in relationship to others. And so interfaith leadership allowed me to get some language and tools to start building pluralistic community first on college campuses that would then take me into congregational settings down the road. And so I received some fellowships for learning and studying, and then I went off to seminary. So at 22, I went into seminary, and I learned about what it might mean to serve as a leader in Unitarian Universalist congregations in a very diverse and yet somewhat homogenous Christian nation where outside of urban settings we mostly find ourselves. So I went to a Christian seminary so that I can learn how to speak not in UU settings, but in diverse settings outside of UU settings, which Unitarian Universalism in southern Indiana is quite an outlier, as it might feel up here sometimes, right? So anyways, fast forward a little bit. I come to Columbus in part because they need a leader who can help them not only conceptually deal with pluralism, but very much approach the built environment for pluralism. How do you actually design for pluralism? And so 9 years in now, we've gone through a pandemic. We've gone through some extricating of the inner dolls out of the kind of the nested doll in one building. Part of that came by having a second building. So what was built during the pandemic was a 10,000 square foot Hindu temple on the campus. Okay, so because this Hindu community, the UU community is about 150 adults, the Hindu temple is about 700 families. Okay, so we're talking a multitude of sizes larger. And again, that's because of a lot of the international communities and the engineering communities that come. A lot of Michigan Tech graduates that moved down there. So this temple allowed for about a 20-year vision to have a building of their own to be built. And they built that, and now you have a UU building and about, no further than the house across the street, the Hindu temple. This is on one big 8-acre piece of land, the Hindu temple. But here's the thing. If you go to a college campus and you have a liberal arts building and you have a science building, and those are your buildings on the campus, which buildings do you go to and where do you encounter difference? You only encounter the amount of difference that are within likely the major or the programs in which you attend. And so really where we're at right now is not only programming for more interaction, for more encounter across the 5 congregations, but actually building a third building between the 2 buildings. Okay, and that's really where you have more of a student center or a library or the rec center or something that allows for that interaction. So for example, we have coffee hour, social hour, just like you have. People love that. Now over at their temple, they don't have a 10 a.m. service or some kind of service like that. People come and go, there's kids' classes. It's functioned and structured very different than UU or Western religious community. But they also serve food every day around the same time. What does it mean to bring those into a common space? And now you're having coffee and chai and fruit and treats and, masala, or curry or something like that. What does that do to the environment of fellowship? That's a good question that we're still exploring. So I named those two congregations. I'm just trying to give you a lay of the land before I get into my research. There's also those three other congregations. Don't sleep on them. The Buddhist community, which is more Zen in the Zen tradition. A Jewish community, which is kind of a eclectic group. They're called a Reformed congregation. But, there's people from Russia who have moved here as Jews. And so you have a diversity, just like in the Hindu community. And you have a pagan community, which is, again, a big umbrella terminology. Now, their congregational sizes are a little smaller and don't necessarily warrant their own built environment. However, there are people who feel we should have a bunch of 1,000 square foot buildings to just diversify it. Again, for the engineers or the finance people there, you could say, well, what's the cost benefit of those, and is that going to benefit? And so there's a lot of good thought and process, so much process. But there are really wonderful things that happen. So, for example, our pagan community and the UU congregation, especially the children's programming, do a lot of programs throughout the year that brings pagan kids and adults and UU kids and adults and the wider community together for the solstices and the equinox and other high holiday, May Day and things like that. And so there's a lot of really interesting things that emerge. We're working towards envisioning an interfaith youth group, where it's because a lot of the congregations experience something maybe we all experience, which is once kids get a little older, there's kind of a cliff event where they're like, do I have to still go? 12, 13, 14 years old. And the question would be is what keeps them going? Is it faith formation? Or is it leadership development? Is it being around allies who are going to support your various identities and identity formation? And what's the difference at some point between a Hindu kid who gets made fun of in a sometimes conservative school setting for bringing vegetarian food from home, and a UU kid who's maybe come out as queer or non-binary who gets made fun of? What in some ways, while theologically may be different, might have a lot more in common and might be able to be in a youth group setting that lifts up and affirms cultural and theological diversity better than this temple, which, a lot of people in the West don't build temples, right? Like a lot of the Indians come over and they're like, oh, they just have existed for hundreds and thousands of years, and it just they self-run, Here they're learning how to run temples. It's very interesting. What if we work together as an example? Okay, so this gets to my research. So in a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, I said, I really think it would benefit all of us if I went back to school to learn more about how to do this, support you all in doing this interfaith community building. And Meadville Lombard, which is one of our Unitarian seminaries down in Chicago, has a Doctor of Ministry program. It's a practical doctorate. It's called terminal, which I don't really appreciate, but it's a terminal degree. And it's really for practitioners of religion who want to go deeper into a subject matter, but not necessarily then go and teach in higher education. And so their program, Doctor of Ministry, is concentrated in the area of social justice leadership. And then in your social justice leadership Doctor of Ministry program, you do some type of original research to culminate your program. It's a 3-year program, full-time. By full-time, it's 2 classes a semester. So I do it while working full-time and raising 2 equally wonderful children who show up equally well in congregational settings. And then the 3rd year, which is where I'm at right now, starting in August, is your writing year and your defense of your thesis. And so over these last 2 years, I've been really honing in on my project, which is essentially going to be the beginning working of a theology of what I'm calling contextual pluralism. contextual pluralism. And I'm going to try to lay it out, and once I see Lori or Jason glaze over, I'm going to wrap it up. But essentially, this 5-chapter project is going to address this critical moment in Unitarian Universalism, where we went from saying, here are the sources of wisdom and truth, where Unitarian Universalism derive meaning. And you've seen those principles and then sources. And in those sources, you got essentially you run the gamut of, wisdom from Judeo-Christian, and then we change it to Jewish and Christian. You have, earth-centered religion, science, for the science folks out there. They just broadly say world religions as well. And so that was kind of where we emphasized what might be the predecessor to the word pluralism. But in the principles, remember there was words like a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. That might be part of it. There was also issues like encouragement for spiritual growth within our congregations. That might be some seeds. But for me, I feel like the fact that they chose the word pluralism was bold. Because pluralism is actually a big academic and practical school of schools of thought that requires us to actually ask ourselves, what do we mean by that? What does the future of UU congregations look like if we lean into pluralism? How much, or said differently, how much room will we create in order to truly embrace our pluralistic identities as Unitarian Universalists? So in many ways, I look at pluralism as something that is both offers promise and peril to us, depending on how well we take it. And part of that peril could be Unitarian Universalism as we know it. And I'm open to figuring out what that means. But I think there's great promise to exploring it. And the way we're going to explore it, in my research at least, that I hope just inspires more conversations, because a lot of people are talking about it. It's not like I'm the only one curious about it. I think we need to talk about two things: how we understand people and how we understand space, or place. Not space, but could be space, but place here. I think we need to radically take a look at what we mean by the self and people and what we mean by the places we gather. Because both of those are deeply shaped by Western logics and logics that have shaped Unitarianism, especially, but Unitarian Universalism. Or at least this is and again, I'm at my early stages of research and writing, so you can come to my defense in April. I think it's on Zoom, so we'll send the link to Lori and bring the whole KUUF crew. But so the chapter on the self is really building off of this idea or curiosity of whether Whitman was right, where he asks himself or something, do I contradict myself? So be it. I am large. I am filled with multitudes. Have you heard that before? Do I contradict? He's like having this long rambling thing, song of myself. Not rambling. He was an ecstatic person. And he said, do I contradict myself? So be it. I am large. I am filled with multitudes. The question I have is, are we constituted through multitudes, through an internal pluralism, an internal contradiction, an internal set of values that contradict one another, identities, pulls, pushes, that we can't really make sense of all the time. And so what we do instead is we suppress it into coherence. We suppress our internal diversity into some sort of sameness, like boy, girl, or like atheist or theist. We create very clear, defined identities where difference is actually a threat to coherence or our singular identities. And I think that the research will show, or the academic engagement will show, that that's true, that there is a logic of the one, or a logic of oneness, that has actually ensnared us to believe when we sing the song, "We Would Be One," or as tranquil streams that meet and merge and flow as one to meet the sea, that there's some sort of aspirational move to return to oneness, not two-ness. Oneness, not manyness. And I think that e pluribus unum, Out of many, oh God, let's melt that away, baby. American. We are one. And the reality is, no, there is something in us that resists oneness. Part of it is carbon. We can't just push ourselves into each other, right? We can't really become one. There's like that story of where the lightning bolt comes, splits people in half. I think it was Hedwig and the Angry Inch did this version in one movie where they turn and try to Plato Symposium. Yes, that's where it is. And they're like hugging and trying to return to their other half, and they hug and they just can't, and then they like essentially die because they can't return to that state. And maybe that wasn't ever the state. But anyway, I digress. The point is that I think whether it's the oneness of individualism, as in we're each one, we are each a one, or universalism, we are all one together, might actually not be serving us as well as we think. So I'm going to be developing something that's more of a polyphilic anthropology that imagines whether, in a way, while suppressed, we have a longing or a love of the multiple. And how do we create space for that vulnerability to move towards the multiple, the multiplicity within, among, and beyond? Okay, we'll put that aside. The next place goes to Churchill. And Churchill said, I know that was a pivot. Churchill said, one of his, maybe known statements or not, but we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. You ever heard that? We shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. I don't know, someone said it, he said it, so I'm going to make sure I footnote it. But think about it. We essentially build our buildings in our own image. Or at the very least, if you're a form and function person, for our own functioning. We create ramps for accessibility, we create windows to let light in, and over time, these things shape us. They affect us. Or said differently, we don't exist outside of the places that we create and recreate. These places are socially created. They don't have meaning outside of our conception of them, perception of them, and lived experience of them. And so there's great theorists who write about the social production of space. And so for me, this is the work that I'm going to be researching to help understand that actually space is a shaper of theology or a theological agent, the spaces we create. So when you then have a space, you say, who has access to that space? Just like who has access to your body? Who can walk through the doors? Who has an easement of use or to cross the path? How do we encounter one another? Or is it impossible to encounter one another because of how we shape that space or set that space up to outward use? It sounds like a lot of people use this building. Lori was telling me all the different groups that use it. So you're already shifting from a lock property is real, that's the only value is realty, real property. You're already shifting whose space this is, and I think that's very powerful and profound. But the more you explore that, the more you will threaten the sense of ownership and maybe move into questions of stewardship. All right, I'm running long. Okay, so the Interfaith Campus is one model of what I would say is in between a micro place of pluralism and macro place of pluralism. We call it a mesospace, where these congregations are trying to say, well, what if we built space together? You know, not just a rental agreement, but like a MOU, which is closer towards a covenant. What does it mean to share in that? What does it mean to create greater easement of not only use, but encounter of one another's difference? And how can we do so in a way that doesn't collapse our separateness into oneness, but allows for both that separate and interdependent or coexistent, or in Thich Nhat Hanh, interbeing. Okay? So I'm going to be examining 3 interfaith campuses to try to extract what might be happening in those spaces. and then eventually offer some theory or some practical tools of how we might, as a movement, continue to explore this. But what I'm interested in, and I do hope we can take a little time for some cue. A little bit of time, maybe one or two comments. But is to really invite us as the fellowship here, or the congregation down in Columbus, to not take for granted the particular context that you're in. Because as I mentioned, contextual pluralism it's not just pluralism, I'm talking about contextual pluralism, which is that pluralism is ultimately place-based. Place-based. It's going to look different in the Keweenaw Peninsula, that's what we call it, than it is in southern Indiana. It's going to look different in Boston, in one neighborhood of Boston or another. It's going to look different if you have a 300-year-old building or something that is more recently bought and renovated. So, and who your people are in your greater proximity, being curious about that and really auditing that understanding your people is what's going to help you to do that, so that it isn't forced, but it's organic and it's humanistic, as in human, or it's humanizing in the work, and ultimately more sustainable over time. All right, and I recognize we'll get only just a couple comments or questions to clarify some things, but then I look forward to engaging more of you during coffee hour. And I'm happy to also, I don't know what the coffee rule is in here, but I'm also happy to pull up some tables and just have a more intense conversation, because I think it's really important work. All right. So I appreciate if there was any coherence in what I said, but as I've mentioned, maybe the incoherence is what we're going for today. So I have this microphone here. I think that will work, right? This one, this handheld? No. Okay. So maybe you just say it out loud, and I'll repeat any key verbs or nouns you use and respond. But is there any comments or questions or push that anyone has? And I'd love to just see how this is resonating. And we might have someone online. Yes, Carol.
Yeah,
Carol.
Peter,
yes,
actually,
let's unmute there.
Together. Yes, I just that's incredibly interesting what you're doing, and amazing it's doing in Columbus, where space is very important, architectural space anyway. And the other thing is, I don't know, a viewpoint of pluralism through the self, if the self is not inside of you, but is outside of you and is a nexus between you and whatever else, be it a tree, a stone, another person, another group. And so you're constantly interacting in that way. And your self is changing constantly depending on context, depending on what at the moment you're interacting with. And it's different every time, maybe ever so slightly, maybe greatly, depending on the circumstance. But the whole idea of a campus, like you're talking about, is fantastic, because you have very different groups of people interacting, and I assume hoping to interact even more so depending on the space you build.
Yes, thank you. And that is really exactly what we're experiencing. We're starting to realize, where am I finding myself on a Sunday morning? I'm coming out of coffee hour, and before I go to my car and go home, I walk over to the Hindu temple and meditate for 15 minutes. That's a weird kind of, I didn't think that's what UUs did, but now I guess it is. And so you're also remaking the identity of Unitarian Universalism as well. Yeah, you're really thinking beyond your property lines, at the very least, to create more porosity or permeability to say, actually, this is a part of the larger, like the utility poles, it's a public good, and people can come in and out, and it's not just at 10:30 on a Sunday, or, it's really, you see it. You didn't know it was there, right? Until it becomes, you've stated its value to the wider community. So I think that's really, it's going to environments rather than buildings.
What is the role of the Muslim community?
There's a very active Muslim community there. They had talked about building on the campus. Their building is right in the heart of the town, which is not a huge city, but 50,000 people. I didn't really place that. But their proximity to kind of everything, it was kind of just not in their best interest to like move 6 miles west of town because of like Friday prayer, get back to work, things like that. But there's still an interfaith partner. There's the campus and there's the community. And the community will always be bigger than the campus. And we don't want the campus to replace the community and start turning that into like a golden calf or like, this is it, we've arrived. This is a tool of the wider community. And so the Muslim community, several Christian communities, there's various groups that just, of course, are off. Maybe one more comment. Thank you. Yes.
I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
My concern in this community is the non-pluralism within Christianity, within the wider Christian thing.
Yes.
I'm talking about people, I don't know if you had John Duncan across when you were at DePaul.
Oh, I know that name, though. I've read his works, yes.
The people who are involved in the historical Jesus,
yes,
as opposed to the people who, a literal interpretation of the Bible.
Yep.
And we are coping with that within this community.
Yep.
There doesn't seem to me to be any way when you have the rigidity on
yes.
one side in moving together.
Yes. I think what I experience is we have a tendency to fortify in the face of those threats or perceived threats, which could be some between reality and response that we have to threat, to just kind of block off whole peoples. And so the question is, how can we make inroads to the types of Christians that actually might be more pluralistic in nature or have those kinds of relationships, as opposed to just saying, like I've said again and again, I do not want our interfaith campus or our pluralist or our interfaith community work to just be like the liberal Christians and the non-Christians. We need to make inroads into the community if you want to affect systemic change. You can create temporary change. So one example briefly, and then we'll wrap. The Mormon community, which is traditionally seen as a more conservative theological tradition, they aren't included in the National Day of Prayer event in Columbus. They're not the right kind of conservative. Partially, kind of like the Catholics weren't the right kind of Christian at certain points. And so they approached, of all people, us, to say, could we create an alternative Day of Prayer event? And regardless of like whether that's a good church-state thing or whatever aside, we've been having now for the third May in a row, this sort of interfaith Day of Prayer event on the same day as the National Day of Prayer event. And one is much more, I would say, inclusive. We have the pagan priest speak. We have Hindus, Buddhists, Jews, liberal Christians, Catholic, the Mormon community, of course, and the UUs. And that's a wonderful counter-programming that takes a few years to start getting out there to say, what is the future of religion in this country? It's not just, we're in a post-secular age. We talked about that during the break, but thank you so much. I also want to give one special shout out for the longer timers from Roger Birchhausen. You might remember Roger, who used to come here every year with his daughter Hattie from Appleton, from the Fox Valley UU Fellowship. Well, I eventually married Hattie, and now I'm in that family. And so Holiday and Cedar are Roger's granddaughters. And so we can take a selfie if you remember Roger, and I'll send it to him. But again, blessings to you all. Thanks for having me today.